Hey guys, Tim Uchuk here, and welcome to this video entitled How to Tame the Chaos as You Scale Your Business. So this is going to be a bit of a different video because I've grabbed a sample from one of our coaching calls where we actually dug in. I was sharing my screen and going through a bunch of examples of processes and different ways that you can capture processes. And so again, the goal of taming the chaos as you scale is to get that tribal knowledge out of your head, out of the heads of your team members, which of course we've got the risk mitigation for when people leave or they're on vacation. We want to know how you do what you do. So big benefits of capturing your processes, again, get that tribal knowledge out of your brain so that you know how you do what you do. It's a good process to pull it out of your brain. There's a quote which goes, if you can't explain what you do as a process, you don't understand what you're doing. So we want to get it out of your head. We also want to have a basis for making improvements on your processes. Again, if it's stuck in your head, it's hard to make improvements. You have no basis for making improvements. So you want to have something that you can point to, you can start to chip away at with your team to make things better over time. Number two, we want to not have this 10 different people as you're hiring and bringing people on board doing the same thing 10 different ways. We want to eliminate that because that is going to introduce chaos. And as important, we're going to talk about the cultural aspects. So cultivating that culture so it does not feel like a headwind or quicksand when you deploy your processes. If you've done this in the past and realized that nobody's paying attention to your processes, the culture is a really important component, which we're going to talk about as well. So the following video, we're going to break it into two parts. Part number one is strategies for creating and capturing standards, as mentioned, as you scale. So we'll talk about an example hiring workflow diagram. I'm going to be sharing my screen and going through so you can see for inspiration how it's structured. We're going to talk about an example. So this is a visual workflow diagram example. Then we're going to get into another example using a document. So I'm going to share some best practices using Google Docs to capture your processes. And we're going to get into a couple different frameworks for the process for the process. Okay, so capturing that stuff, an easy way to get the stuff out of your brain and get it organized in a way that it's distilled and everybody can wrap their heads around it. So I'll be talking about inputs and outputs. You'll understand what that means in a moment. Majors and minors. So the major minor technique for pulling information out of your head or out of your team members' heads, so you can capture it and get it organized in a way that everybody understands. A simple formula to help you create clear instructions every time. Chunking, we're going to talk about the chunking strategy, which again is a way for you to really capture a lot of information and boil it down in a way that it makes sense. People can wrap their head around it. So that's number one. We're going to talk about processes. Part two, we'll be talking about change management 101, how to cultivate a culture that thrives during changing times. So this is an important one, by the way. It's one of those nuancy things that you don't realize until you realize it's not working with your team. Symptoms of this are high turnover, low morale. So change management is a really important topic, and I want to share a couple mindsets with you that are going to help you navigate the waves of change in your business. And a mindset to instantly build. We're going to talk about resilience within your team and culture. So how you guys can reframe how you look at change within your business, making improvements. We're going to talk about a reframing strategy that you can share with your leaders as well, so you can recalibrate the culture within your business. The number one source of frustration among your teams and how to fix it. And lastly, how to make your team excited for change. So part one, again, we're going through your processes. Part two, we're going through the change management culture that you'll need to cultivate in order to weather the storms of changing times. So with that, you're going to see the second part of this video where I'm going to be sharing my screen. Again, this is coming from a coaching call. So I hope this inspires you. And with that, let's get into it. So this is our workflow map, and this goes through the training so you can visualize it. You can see the steps on the top here, the columns, the rows are the who's. So you've got the supervisor, candidate, and then you have all the resources here, and then you have the options. So this document here mirrors this process. So it's just another way of looking at it. And by the way, you guys can use this as inspiration for your process creation, because this is a process. It's a repeatable instruction, and you can see it just for inspiration. This is repurposed three different ways. Way number one is a workflow map or diagram. Now, this is something that we can't actually execute on, right? This is just for getting a single source of truth and agreement on here's the process. Here's the who's, the what's, and the when's from a high level. and we can pack in all the resources in a very efficient way, right? Right here, you can see, okay, how do I do this? Where's the resource? It's right here. Follow the line. It's right there. So that's the workflow map version of this. The other one is a document. And so when you guys are creating for documents, the benefit with Google Docs is a couple things. Thing number one is they've introduced like months ago these checklist. So rather than bullets, we can use checklists. So if I go like this, creates a checklist. So that allows us, if you guys are hiring or using this, you can go file, make a copy, and use this to check the boxes. We have drop downs here as well, so you can stay on top of the one of 4 stages here. So we got the menu on the left, and then if you are using this to run it, you can also use it as a working document where we use the comments where you can tag team members and you can make notes alongside as you're going through it, or even like improvement ideas. So a couple different ideas there. From a process documentation standpoint, if you look at this for inspiration, just to point out, we've got on page 1, we've got the title, we've got the information so that if an alien was looking at this, they would get the gist for what the process is, what we're looking at. And then a good starting point is, and we have I'll share this with you as well. So this is a template that we use to get really clear on what the 30,000 foot view of a process is. And we start with very like Fred Flintstone simple in terms of, okay, what's the title of the thing? And then what are the major milestones? So if you look at like a Boeing aircraft, for example, I think there's 8 major milestones to build an airplane. Of course, there's a lot of nuance and minutia within those, but if you can chunk it into, 4 big steps here, and we start with, I'll share this with you guys so you have it as well. It's called a process scoping diagram. So here you can see this blue box is the process. And then you've got the steps that you can add in here, and then the main activities within the steps. So these are the things that you do in order to satisfy this and move on, hand on the baton to the next. The other thing that is useful within this type of a diagram is I think of these as inputs and outputs. So activities here and desired outcomes here. So if we're talking about hiring, for example, that first step that we're looking at over here is identify and define new hires. So the main activities there would be create the job posting, update the responsibilities and assess what they would be actually doing, create the job description, create the job posting. Those are like the main activities, and those would go here. And the outcome is, if these are the inputs to create this output, like these are secondary to the main outcome. What at the end of the day do we want to accomplish? It really doesn't matter what these things are, as long as it accomplishes this stuff here. So desired outcomes would be your job posting and, the responsibilities have been ironed out, right? So what are those outcomes that we want to have in place in order to hand that baton on to the next? Does that make sense? Inputs and outputs, and then major stages. So when you have this in place, it makes it so much easier to open up, a document like this, because now you've got your recipe. Okay, there's 4 things here, and within Google Docs to create this makes it really helpful, because essentially these are like majors and minors. So the majors we've identified, there's 4 major steps with a Boeing aircraft, 8 major steps. So the majors, if we go identify and define new hires, we start with the majors. And what you can do with Google Docs, which is pretty nice, is I'm going to just go from a formatting perspective here, and I'm going to call this a heading. So when you do that on the left-hand side here, it gives us and I'll indent this properly because we've got the title and then we've got these indented. So I'll just go H2. So the very first thing I do is once I have these things, I type them out immediately so that we have the 30,000. So post and filter. So we'll say that. Highlight H2. So now it's a matter of we've got the majors. Now we fill these with the minors. So within here, you can see here what are all the things, and you create the bullets or the checklist. So here we've got update accountability chart, review needs, create job description, determine prerequisites, confirm compensation. So that's the high level activities. Now the actual recipe and links to resources are right here. So notice it says review and update accountability chart. So you have a clear understanding. I like to, by the way, when creating instruction or when we're setting up like projects or even delegating tasks, these two magical words help to provide great context. They force you to tie the benefit to a statement to give more color to whatever it is you're describing. So whenever possible, tag on so that when you're writing things, it'll force you to think through what's the purpose. Because if you've got toddlers, that's anytime you ask them to do something, they're going to say why. I don't know who else here has kids under 7, but we got to give them the so that so they can learn and understand. And it's no different when we're creating our processes, giving them the why. And so that forces you to do that. So review and update the accountability chart. For somebody who's new reading this, they're going to ask why. What's the purpose of this? So that. And then we got the link here. Is that helpful? Majors, minors, start with the process scoping diagram. But once you have this is your recipe, and you can get in here and get as nuanced and granular as you need to get. And you have this nice high level. So people get the nice balance of okay, we're really doing 4 things. We're chunking, right? From a mental cognition standpoint, chunking allows people to wrap their heads around things better. So we chunk it. There's 4 chunks within. There's a lot of things, but what are all these things? We've chunked it further by having the main activities. So they understand the big milestones, and then the high level stuff here. And then, and that gives us a really good overview. So this is the document version. Hopefully that's helpful in terms of, and we have a template for this in our program as well. Happy to share it if you guys want it, for you guys to build this out, but it starts with this and then you build out the majors. So we talked about the workflow diagram for a process. We talked about turning a process into a document this way. And then the last way, if you want to actually execute this using a project management tool like Trello or Asana or any of them, once you have this in place, you can create a workflow using, again, a tool like Trello or Asana. And so these actually become the stages. I'll show you how we do it in Trello. These become the stages, and you can create a template which captures all of this stuff. So this makes sense here, majors and minors? Before I move on, stop me if you want me to explain or expand. And the other thing, Sean and I were talking about this right here. From a mindset perspective with your team, this is like one of the best mindset things that you guys can adopt as a team and as a culture, and you guys as coaches for your team to really manage, because a lot of what we're doing here, especially in this program, is change management. So one of the biggest probably challenges or headwinds you guys will face implementing what we're doing here is going to be tied to, I think of them as white blood cells. Everybody naturally, even if there's no malice behind it, everybody naturally hates change. And so you guys need to, and your leaders need to really, you got to reframe the change within your business through the lens of, that's why I love Kaizen and continuous improvement so much, because it applies to, it's a gift for, us in life. If you get disappointed when something doesn't go your way in life, and think of us as parents, telling our kids just, oh, you fell down, get up, dust yourself off. Did you learn something? Okay, let's apply the learning and move forward. That's what we teach our kids. So same messaging around change within your operation. When people, the expectation, and it's not because I think it's default, we just expect things to be perfect out of the gates. So when we build in the expectation, it's kind of like the scientific method that things won't be perfect, and that's okay. When we realize, when we implement this stuff and we see that things aren't perfect, we're not going to flip out. We actually anticipated that. And so this is the technical term for continuous improvement through the scientific method is PDCA, which stands for plan, do, check, adjust. And this applies to almost everything when it comes to like your projects, your processes, any changes you guys are implementing. PDCA it's kind of comforting because again, we're not surprised when things don't work out. It's just like, that's okay. Well, what worked? We're going to do more of that. What didn't work? Let's do less of that. Let's move on. Let's stop blaming the things out of the scope of our control. It's just a good mental framework that's going to serve even your team. It's going to set them up for success in their lives, in their personal lives, because they're not going to freak out when things don't go their ways. So that's kind of the benefit you're also giving them, which they can apply to other realms of their lives. So again, PDCA, let's say we're building out this process, we plan. So we just went through kind of a mini cycle there. We planned it up here. So let's go to the top. We planned it through the process scoping diagram. So here's what we think it's going to be. We've got like the 80%. And then you execute. So the doing is Sean and I were talking about the hiring and the onboarding. So we planned it. We had the conversation. We used the template. Now we're going to launch it. We're actually going to post that job in Indeed, and we're going to do it. Now, oftentimes we miss the second half of the pie, and this is where we get frustrated and we start to blame each other and throw people under the bus, and we're pissed off and nothing works here and everything's not perfect. But when you guys have this vocabulary in your arsenal, and you're intentional around, okay, let's actually do a check and adjust. And we're doing this rapidly for a new truck body build we're doing right now, because we're anticipating there to be bugs. There's like quality issues from some of our suppliers. And so if we're just expecting things to be perfect and we're not intentionally having a meeting where we check and adjust and we make a list of all the things that aren't working well, then we're just going to get more of the same. It's the definition of insanity. So I was in Edmonton like a month or two ago, maybe 2 months. That's the first thing we did. I sensed that people were frustrated. I had to reinforce this, right? People were frustrated. The vendor is supplying us with this stuff that's out of spec and we're having to do all this rework. Okay, so where is it listed? Do we have a list of it? And are we communicating it back to them? I would have a hunch that if the owner of that company knew that they were shipping all of this junk to us, he wouldn't be very happy. So why don't we make a good list of this, send it to them, and say, how can we help you? How can we help you guys get better? And as we continue to track this stuff and you guys are getting better, we're going to still feed that back to you. And we start to get the right, we give them a good feedback loop. You guys are awesome. This is improved. This is improved. So building that check and adjust into it is really, really an important aspect of change management. And then you as a culture, you start to build this into your vocabulary and the way you do things. And this continuous improvement cycle is, look at future gifts. That's the best way to look at it. So when it comes to change in this program, and you guys are implementing a lot of the stuff that we teach, giving your team that vocabulary, I started referring to it as upgrades. We're not changing for the sake of change. We're changing for the sake of making our tomorrows a little bit better than our todays. We're changing for the sake of, we want to eliminate any friction when it comes to you guys doing your jobs. So friction in terms of you guys have questions, we're making some mistakes because we don't have the right information. We want to eliminate all that stuff so that it feels easy. At the end of the day, that's what we're doing this stuff for. We want it to feel easy so that we can be efficient, because if we're efficient, customers are going to be happier. Our reputation won't take a hit, so we're not eating crow all the time and putting ourselves in a bad spot. So there's so many benefits to the change, but we have to interpret what the change represents. It's not change for change's sake. It's change for future gifts for all of us so that we can create that big shared vision of ourselves and make it real. So reframing is either future gifts or upgrades, future gifts. So that's kind of the terminology that we use as a team. And we keep saying that's an awesome future gift, when somebody comes up with an improvement idea. So rather than change, you know what I mean?